All right, so we're back for another deep dive, and today we're going to be talking about Bitcoin. But we're going way beyond just, the whole like number going up, number going down thing. We're going to be looking at the stories around Bitcoin, and we've got a ton of great articles and research here that we're going to be pulling from. So get ready to learn some stuff.
Yeah, Bitcoin's got such a fascinating history. I mean, there's the mystery of who created it in the first place.
Yeah.
And then you've got these crazy stories like, remember that guy who bought pizzas with Bitcoin way back when? Turns out those pizzas would be worth millions today.
Hmm.
It just goes to show how much Bitcoin has changed the world.
It really does. And we've got to start with the big one, right? The mystery of Satoshi Nakamoto. Like,
Yeah.
everybody knows the name, but who is this person? Or is it even just one person? I mean, we've got all these articles here about people trying to figure out who Satoshi really is. There was that one guy, Jorian Nakamoto, right? And then Craig Wright also claimed to be Satoshi for a while. Even Peter Todd's name got thrown into the mix.
And they've all denied it, of course, which I think just adds to the whole mystique of Bitcoin. The fact that it came from an idea, not a specific person, really sets it apart from traditional currencies. Those are all tied to governments and central banks, but with Bitcoin, it's all about decentralization.
Yeah, that anonymity definitely makes things interesting. Okay, so let's fast forward a bit to 2010. This is when we meet Laszlo Hanyecz, who decided to buy two pizzas using Bitcoin. Pretty normal transaction, right? Except he paid 10,000 Bitcoins for those pizzas.
Oh yeah, can you imagine? Those pizzas would be worth a fortune today. But back then, it was a huge deal just to be able to use Bitcoin to buy something real. Like, it was proof that this digital currency could actually function in the real world.
And it kind of paved the way for how we use Bitcoin today, right? I mean,
Hmm.
it's not just about buying pizza anymore. We're seeing Bitcoin used for all sorts of things, good and bad.
Right, that's the thing about Bitcoin. It has this, like, double-edged sword quality to it. On the one hand, you have its potential for good, for things like financial inclusion and making transactions more efficient. But then there's also the potential for misuse, like we see on the dark web. It's been that way from the very beginning.
Yeah, and that tension is something we're going to be exploring a lot more in this deep dive, so stay tuned for that. Okay, let's jump ahead a few years now to 2021. This is when El Salvador made history by becoming the first country to make Bitcoin legal tender, like right alongside the US dollar. Their president, Nayib Bukele, had this whole vision of attracting investment and making it easier for Salvadorans to send money back home from abroad.
Yeah, it was a pretty bold move. I mean, no other country had ever done anything like it before. And the results have been, well, kind of mixed. Tourism did get a boost for sure. But Bitcoin adoption among everyday people hasn't really taken off the way Bukele hoped. Plus, there's the whole issue of financial risk, especially with Bukele using public funds to buy Bitcoin himself.
Yeah, that definitely raised some eyebrows. So I guess the question is, what can other countries learn from El Salvador's experiment? Is it a cautionary tale, or is there something valuable there for other countries thinking about adopting cryptocurrency?
Hmm, that's a tough one. I think it's probably a bit of both, to be honest. El Salvador's situation is pretty unique, but it does highlight how hard it can be to get people to use a new currency, especially when that currency is as volatile as Bitcoin.
All right, let's switch gears for a sec and head over to Kazakhstan. So for a while, Kazakhstan was this like global hub for Bitcoin mining, and that was because of their cheap electricity, most of which comes from coal. I'm going to guess that wasn't the most sustainable situation in the long run.
Yeah, you guessed right. So Bitcoin mining, it uses a ton of energy. You've got all these powerful computers basically racing to solve complex math problems, which is what keeps the whole Bitcoin network secure. And because Kazakhstan had all this cheap coal-powered electricity, it was like a magnet for miners.
No.
But it also led to some pretty serious consequences.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading about this. There were like power shortages and blackouts, right? And didn't the government eventually have to step in and shut down a lot of the mining operations?
They did. It just became unsustainable. And, that whole episode in Kazakhstan really brings up the environmental concerns around Bitcoin mining, especially when it's relying on fossil fuels. It's a big part of the debate about whether Bitcoin can really be sustainable in the long term.
Okay, so we've gone from national energy crises to personal ones. And this next story is about a guy named James Howells. Now, James accidentally threw away a hard drive, and that hard drive had a small fortune in Bitcoin on it, something like 8,000 Bitcoins, which is a lot.
Oh man, that's rough. Just think about that hard drive sitting in a landfill somewhere,
Mm.
potentially holding millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin. And the worst part is, unlike with a bank, there's no way to reverse the mistake or get that Bitcoin back.
Yeah, there's no customer support line to call for that one. I read that James even offered to donate a big chunk of his lost fortune to charity. If the local council would let him dig up the landfill to find the hard drive, it seems like a long shot, but I can't blame the guy for trying.
It really highlights how different Bitcoin is from traditional finance. It's all about personal responsibility. You're in charge of your own security and making sure your Bitcoin is safe.
And if you lose your hard drive, well, it's a tough lesson to learn. But it's an important one, and it's something everyone needs to keep in mind when dealing with Bitcoin. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground already, but there's still so much more to talk about. So stick around, because up next we're going to be diving into one of the biggest scandals to ever hit the crypto world: the rise and fall of Sam Bankman-Fried and his FTX exchange. Trust me, you don't want to miss this one.
Oh yeah, that's a wild ride. Definitely a story that shows how much is at stake in this world of cryptocurrency. We're going to break it all down for you, so stay tuned.
Okay, so we're back and ready to dive into this crazy story about Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX. Now, this guy was like the golden boy of crypto for a while. His exchange, FTX, was valued at billions of dollars.
Yeah, Bankman-Fried was seen as this visionary, kind of a genius even. FTX grew incredibly fast. It was one of the biggest crypto exchanges out there. And for those who might not know, these exchanges are basically platforms where you can buy, sell, trade all sorts of cryptocurrencies.
Right. They're kind of like the stock market, but for crypto. But then, boom, everything just imploded. It was like watching a house of cards collapse. There were accusations of fraud, misuse of customer funds, risky bets gone wrong. It was a massive scandal that really rocked the entire crypto world.
Absolutely. I mean, it really shook people's confidence, and it brought up all these questions about transparency and regulation in the crypto space. Like, do we need more oversight? How do we prevent this from happening again? The collapse of FTX had a huge ripple effect. I mean, it wasn't just about FTX itself. It made people question the stability of the whole crypto market.
Yeah, it definitely has a chilling effect for a while. And, Bankman-Fried ended up being convicted and sentenced to 25 years in prison, which shows you how seriously these crimes are being taken. It's a reminder that even in this fast-paced, sometimes lawless-feeling world of crypto, the rules still apply.
Definitely. And I think it's a good lesson for everyone involved in crypto, whether you're an investor or a trader or just someone curious about the technology. You got to do your due diligence, research the platforms you're using, be careful with your investments.
No doubt about that. It's interesting to look back at all the stories we've talked about so far. We've got these individuals like Laszlo and James who had these very personal experiences with Bitcoin. And then we've got entire countries like El Salvador and Kazakhstan trying to figure out how to integrate this technology into their economies. And of course, there's the cautionary tale of FTX. It's all connected. It's all part of this bigger story of how Bitcoin is changing the world.
What's fascinating to me is how all these stories touch on these bigger themes, like innovation, disruption, the changing relationship between technology, finance, and society. Bitcoin is this force that's challenging the traditional way things are done.
Yeah, it's making us rethink everything we thought we knew about money and value. Okay, so for our last story in this deep dive, we're going to talk about something that could be a major turning point for Bitcoin. And that is the emergence of spot Bitcoin ETFs.
Oh, yeah, this is a big one. So spot Bitcoin ETFs, they're basically investment products that track the price of Bitcoin, but you don't actually have to own any Bitcoin directly. It's a way for people who are more comfortable with traditional investing to get exposure to Bitcoin.
Right, so it's like buying a stock, but instead of owning a piece of a company, you're kind of betting on the price of Bitcoin. And what's really interesting is that we're seeing some of the biggest names in finance getting into the Bitcoin ETF game, like BlackRock, Fidelity, Grayscale. These are not small players.
This is huge. It shows that institutional investors are starting to take Bitcoin seriously, which could lead to even more mainstream adoption down the line.
So is this it? Is Bitcoin finally going mainstream?
It's definitely a step in that direction, but the crypto landscape is constantly evolving. It's hard to say for sure. I think it's important to remember that there are still a lot of different opinions about Bitcoin. Some people see it as the future of finance, others are still very skeptical.
And that's fair. I mean, there's still a lot of uncertainty. But one thing's for sure, it's going to be an interesting ride. And that, my friend, brings us to the end of our Bitcoin stories for this deep dive. But don't worry, the conversation doesn't have to end here. We want to hear from you, the listener.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on all this? Have you had any experiences with Bitcoin yourself? Good, bad, somewhere in between?
We'd love to hear your stories and perspectives. So head over to our website or social media and let's keep this conversation going, because the world of Bitcoin is constantly evolving. And who knows what the next chapter will bring.
I think that's the most exciting part. The future is unwritten, and Bitcoin could play a major role in shaping it.
It's a wild ride, that's for sure. But hey, that's what makes it so interesting, right? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Bitcoin. We hope you learned something new, maybe even got a little inspired. And remember, keep diving, keep exploring, keep learning, because there's a whole world of knowledge out there waiting to be discovered.
Yeah.
It's amazing, right? We've covered so much ground from like the very beginning of Bitcoin with that whole Satoshi mystery to, pizzas and hard drives and even countries trying to figure this whole thing out. And now we've got Wall Street getting in on the action with these ETFs. It feels like, I don't know, we've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah, it's true. Bitcoin has come a long way, and I think it's only going to get more interesting from here.
Okay, so thinking back on everything we've talked about, what do you think is like the most important takeaway for someone who's maybe just hearing about Bitcoin for the first time?
That's a good question. I think it's the fact that Bitcoin represents a totally different way of thinking about money. It's like decentralized, right?
Mhm.
And transparent. It's got this built-in security that you just don't get with traditional systems. And that makes it, well, pretty revolutionary, potentially.
Yeah, it definitely makes you question the way things have always been done.
Okay.
All right, so before we wrap up this deep dive, let's turn the mic over to you, the listener.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
What's your Bitcoin story? Have you invested? Maybe you've used it to buy something, or maybe you're just starting to learn about it now.
Whatever your experience is, we want to hear about it.
So head over to our website, leave a comment, send us a message. Let's keep this conversation going because the world of Bitcoin is constantly changing.
It's like a moving target. There's always something new happening.
It's been an incredible journey exploring all these Bitcoin stories with you. We hope you enjoyed it, learned a thing or two, and maybe even got a little inspired.
Yeah, keep that curiosity going, keep diving deeper, keep learning.
Because the more you learn about Bitcoin, the more fascinating it becomes. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.